most advanced HUD system.
During the Vietnam War, the US Air Force requested a fleet of Navy A-7D Corsair IIs, modified to Air Force standards, to serve a range of strike roles typically performed by the Super Sabre or Sky Raider. However, what started as a temporary solution soon became arguably the most effective aircraft in the US Air Force's Vietnam fleet, equipped with a remarkable array of new digital technology at a time when most planes still relied on largely analog systems. And just a reminder, if you want to support our channel, please check out our merch store or become a member. This all helps keep the channel running. And we also have an Instagram at peacemaker.aviation. Links in the description. Enjoy the video.
In 1960, the US Navy began reviewing proposals to replace the A-4. At the time, the Skyhawk was expected to remain in service for only a short period. From 1960 to 1962, proposals emerged for a new subsonic strike aircraft based on an existing design. Such an aircraft was intended to feature a smaller airframe, improved mission endurance, and greater payload capacity compared to contemporary jet fighters. It was also intended to be developed quickly and through an easier development process. In May 1963, the Navy issued a request for proposal along these lines, and by February 1964, Vought had won the contract with their proposal, the A-7, and in March received funding. It was based on the F-8 Crusader, albeit shorter, subsonic, and oriented towards air-to-ground operations. On an impressively short timeline, the aircraft was fast-tracked into production. By September 1965, the so-called A-7A had its maiden flight, and by December was demonstrating its impressive ability to carry a payload twice that of the Skyhawk. On the heels of this, a more powerful variant was also put into development, the A-7B. Keeping to this impressive timeline, by February 1967, the newly named Corsair II achieved operational capability, and by December was serving in Vietnam. What the Navy received in the Corsair was impressive. Over its 2-year development, the aircraft encountered no major issues, and the end product soon caught the attention of the Air Force. In 1965, the DoD concluded that the US Air Force would benefit from a new, single-use strike fighter. At the time, strike missions and close air support were carried out by 2 platforms, the Hun and the older, more robust A-1 Sky Raider. The F-100 had a somewhat limited payload, yet it remained the Air Force's go-to platform for most strike missions in southern Vietnam. Both were accurate, but increasingly outdated and cumbersome under load. In 1965, the Air Force believed the F-5 could be the solution. During the Skokie Tiger evaluations later that year, the F-5C proved highly effective. It was far more nimble, better able to defend itself, and just as accurate. However, the core problem of payload capacity remained. In March 1966, interest shifted to the Corsair. Initially, the Air Force called for a modified A-7A, but it soon became clear that a major overhaul was required. Requests included a revamped avionics suite, new digital systems, and a more powerful engine. A concept for such a system was already in the pipeline. The Integrated Light Attack Avionics Suite, or ILAS-65, was promising and would form the basis for some of the upgrades in the new program, which was now being designated as the A-7D. With the Navy studying its own upgrade program, a joint force was assembled. It would be the third major design the Air Force would receive in a decade, based on collaboration with the Navy, the others being the F-111 and F-4C. Captain Bob Doss from the Navy joined with Air Force Colonel Bob Hales and Thomas Gallagher from the Naval Program Office to get the program rolling. If it succeeded, the upgrades from the 7D would be ported onto the Navy's planned 7E. Immediately, new systems were drawn up. A new array of digital tech ranging from a radar system to an INS and a weapon delivery system was developed. At the core of this multi-piece suite would be a digital computer, feeding quantized data to a variety of systems, including a digital HUD, something the British had already validated on the Buccaneer S2 in 1965. A new gun was chosen, the M61, and the old TF-30 engine was scrapped in favour of a workaround. A Rolls-Royce Spey, adapted by Allison, became the TF-41. Internally, a new ejection system with an Air Force spec survival kit was fitted, along with a different oxygen system. Externally, a boom receptacle was added for aerial refueling, while the Navy spec undercarriage was altered, adding new gear, anti-skid, wheels, and brakes. By the time the mods were complete in 1968, the expected unit cost had doubled. However, the upgrades were deemed well worth it, so much so that the Navy was looking to integrate them into its own A-7E. Taking its maiden flight on April 5, 1968, deliveries began shortly after, in December.
With the new TF-41 engines, which increased thrust from 12,000 to over 14,000 pounds, the aircraft that arrived in December had decent specs on paper. At 46 feet long and with a 38-foot wingspan, it had a top speed of over 600 knots, which was, surprisingly, little affected by payload capacity. Depending on mission profile, at sea level it had a combat radius of around 900 miles or 1,600 kilometers. A 15,000-pound stores capacity allowed for up to 30 Mark 82s to be carried, alongside an array of modern guided weapons it would be compatible with once they were available.
Beyond this, the list of improvements to the finalized product was impressive. The new M61 had triple the firing rate of the original pair of 20mm cannons. New gear, brakes, and anti-skid enabled flared landings on the rough airfields in Southeast Asia. Inside the cockpit, the layout was redesigned for ease of use and to accommodate all the new digitally assisted equipment. At the core of this was the ASN91 central computer, which calculated a range of ongoing tasks from weapon delivery to navigation. This was supported by the solid-state CP953A air data computer, which received flight information from the aircraft, digitized it, and sent it to help compute other tasks. Further flight data was recorded by the APN-190 Doppler drift detector and the APN-141 radar altimeter system, both of which also fed into the central computer. Locational precision was then achieved by the INS, a very precise digitally assisted system called the ASN90 Inertial Reference System. Once again, data from this was sent to other computers on board, from the central computer to aid in navigation and weapons, to a projected map display. This display, the ASN99 PMDS, was also a technological innovation. Since 1969, the Defense Mapping Agency had used high-resolution charts to produce film strips of terrain for navigation. The Navy, followed by the Air Force, requested their own prints of particular environments. Using brand new camera and lens technology, these extremely high-fidelity strips were produced. The PMDS, built by Computing Devices Company in Canada, would use a film reel around 200 frames long. Choosing the relevant map type, either the 1 to 2 million scale jet navigation chart or the 1 to 500,000 scale tactical pilotage chart, the screen would then align the film onto a 5-inch display using the Lambert conformal projection and then correlate it with the INS alignment. As the pilot flew and turned, so would the map display. To make it easier, designers also set the zoom to 1.4 times so that the screen, around 30 inches away from the eye, would look the same as a standard chart, which was usually held 20 inches away, thus equating the fidelity to the pilot's eyes. Each chart was also updated to include low-level hazards and other important landmarks that were not present when the original chart was produced. This in itself was an impressive and delicate system to use. Designers had to create a frame matrix for each map, with such precise tolerances that the original paper maps were deemed inaccurate due to slight shrinkage or warping. Instead, the maps were cut to a tolerance of just 0.02 of an inch and accurately aligned onto a lithographic panel. Once perfectly aligned to the matrix, a 70mm camera with a specially built film back was used. This film back had an accuracy of 0.005 of an inch, since each film advance had to line up perfectly with a dead center point marked on each litho panel. This was further aided by a master grid overlay before each photo was taken. This was crucial, since the PMDS would not correct for any inconsistencies in the film strip. The photos were then reduced onto a 35mm strip using a special high-accuracy Kodak Ektachrome processor capable of resolving up to 200 line pairs per millimeter. Finally, this was fed into a high-resolution color contact printer to make duplicates. This impressive process would be used in other aircraft, like the F-111, which used a special 150mm film format, up until the A-10, which adopted a digital ROM system instead. Regardless, the last major hardware integration into the 7D was the APQ-126 multi-mode forward-looking radar, which had the capacity for ground mapping, terrain following, and aiding in weapons release. All of this was then visualized and projected onto the state-of-the-art HUD, the AVQ-7. Altogether, the result was outstanding. The HUD itself was unparalleled at that point. Much like aircraft today, the display showed everything from waterline, roll angle, and pitch attitude. This in itself was incredibly advanced for its time, but it didn't stop there. With all systems integrated, the HUD visualized two new release modes: continuously calculated release point and continuously calculated impact point. In CCIP mode, the pilot could easily visualize exactly where each bomb would go, thanks to the now familiar impact line and pipper, made possible by the rapid computation of both radar and digital flight data. Even this by itself was a total game changer. Prior to this, the F-4D with WRCS had been among the best options for delivering unguided bombs. It was a game changer itself when it arrived, but was complex by comparison. The Wizzo had to attain a ground lock, while the pilot flew a specific profile to trigger the release. With ideal parameters met, the WRCS would supposedly yield an accuracy to within 170 feet, twice as accurate as the older F-4C, but less so than the Corsair, while also being more finicky. In the Corsair, digital CCIP meant even an amateur pilot could pickle a target with accuracy nearly as good as that of the latest paveway laser-guided bombs. CCRP was even more impressive. Using the digital INS, a target point could be selected regardless of time or weather, and it was visualized by a diamond designator box. The pilot could then fly the ASL, wait for the solution queue, and fly home. No complex calculations from an IP, no archaic analog steering lines. What the platform offered was unique. It was both incredibly precise, yet incredibly simple to learn. With all systems go, the 7D was finally greenlit to head to Vietnam.
This is an offensive weapon. It's designed as a fighter bomber. It has extreme long range, endurance, and it carries a great load of weapons with a very sophisticated weapons delivery system. It's very accurate, it's very survivable, it has a lot of armor plate, and we love it for the tactical air mission.
Are they going to have to adjust to a new philosophy?
Well, of course, the pilots will. They'll be flying low level as opposed to high-level interceptor tactics. They'll be delivering bombs and rockets and firing machine gun, which or rather firing a 20mm cannon, which the F-102 didn't have.
The Corsair II, nicknamed the short little ugly feller, can carry 15,000 pounds of ordnance. That's 3 times the load of bombs that its forefathers carried in World War II. It'll mean more dangerous missions for the Pittsburgh pilots and less glamour.
Arriving in theatre in October 1972, 2 years after the A-7E, the Air Force Corsairs quickly got to work, now with the nickname Slough. Sent to Korat Air Base in Thailand with the 354th Tactical Fighter Wing, the Corsair crews arrived at an interesting time. While the original plan had been to supplement Huns and Sky Raiders in a close air support role, by this point most troops had been pulled back and TIC incidents were less common. Crews were therefore assigned more often to two other mission types. The first was conventional air interdiction, flying to intercept targets on the move once they had been spotted. This was usually done by F-100s. It could do this particularly well, both due to its INS accuracy and CCIP. The second was a combat search and rescue mission type, known as Sandy. Usually done by Sky Raiders, crews would locate downed pilots, then lead in and assist search and rescue helicopters. Pilots assigned to these missions sometimes had previous experience as FACs, with some having served in Misty, and were accustomed to low-level flying in hostile territory. Much like Misty, the missions were dynamic and sometimes quite long. In one famous incident, pilot Colin Clark spent nearly 9 hours on combat search and rescue, aiding in the rescue of a Wild Weasel Thud crew while under direct fire, earning him the Air Force Cross. Broadly, the 7D had a strong opening show. Within its first 10 weeks of service, the aircraft flew 6,568 combat sorties. 5,897 were strike missions, a further 542 were search and rescue, and 230 were special operations as part of Linebacker II. With proper use of ground mapping, the new bombing modes, and the HUD, pilots could put unguided bombs on target with a circular error of probability of just 18 meters, over twice as accurate as the F-4D using WRCS. It's worth noting that laser-guided Paveway 1s, the most accurate bombs available at the time, had a circular error probable of 6 meters. This meant the 7D could now achieve a similar level of precision using general-purpose bombs. Before long, it had earned a good reputation among troops on the ground. It was one of the only aircraft that could safely strike targets that were in close contact with troops. Even in monsoon conditions, CCRP now allowed pilots to release bombs blind and still achieve relative accuracy, something that could also be done on night sorties. By this point in 1972, several other smaller systems had also been installed, including an HSI, the AQU-6, an ECM warning system, the APR-36, and ECM pods, starting with the ALQ-71-2. By January 1973, the Corsair had achieved an impressive performance record. Over the 3-month period, despite its high sortie count, only 6 had been lost, placing it alongside the F-111 as one of the lowest loss rates per sortie of the war. It had also achieved the highest average payload delivery and the highest average accuracy of any aircraft in its class, and was listed second only to the B-52 in terms of the amount of ordnance delivered against Hanoi. It was also far easier for ground crews, with low maintenance hours and fast turnarounds. It had become arguably the most precise aircraft in theatre, matched only by its twin, the A-7E. As direct hostilities with North Vietnam ended in late January, the Corsair continued flying strike missions over Laos until February 22nd and over Cambodia until August 15th. In the latter case, the 7D became the primary strike aircraft in the region at the time. They would then see action in the last direct engagement of the conflict. In May 1975, crews took part in the rescue of the SS Mayaguez, a US freighter captured by the Khmer Rouge. On May 13th, they strafed the ocean in a show of force to halt the ship, and on May 15th, believing the crew were captured on a nearby island, they took part in the recapture operation. Some strafed the boat with tear gas, while a Marine, part of a helicopter assault force, who had been shot down off the coast, used an emergency radio as he swam to call in Corsair strikes along the beach to clear it. During the operation, the 7Ds operated alongside A-7Es from the Navy, assisting the Marine Force on the island and helping to conclude the war in Southeast Asia.
By the mid-70s, an Air Force replacement for the Corsair was underway. In 1974, the A-10 Warthog was procured, and the first 7Ds were sent to the National Guard service, although some crews, however, were transitioned to the F-4E. In the years that followed, the aircraft remained a common sight, often appearing at exercises and rotating across bases in the States. Despite being phased out of frontline service, production continued for some time. The A-7D run continued into 1976, with 459 units delivered, and the twin-seat combat-ready A-7K trainer was developed between 1978 and 1980.
Tell me about this bird.
Well, this is quite an aircraft, and the heart of it, of course, is the avionics system. And it's through this avionics system that it's possible to do your proper navigation and also your bombing when you get to the point of your target where you're going to be bombing. It's got its own tactical computer, and this computer feeds information to and from various other components in the aircraft, your inertial measurement system, etc. And it's through these systems that you're able to do the outstanding job that the A-7 is capable of doing.
I see our pilots having it.
Oh, yes.
Looking it over. Our men are excited about this, sir. Are you?
Oh, certainly. Absolutely. I'm just thrilled to death to fly the airplane, to have it as part of the wing. And as I indicated, this unit becomes the second unit in our wing to have the A-7s. We have two other units with F-100s, and I'm hoping someday to get the entire wing equipped with the A-7 aircraft.
It's that good?
Oh, absolutely, without question.
Good.
The Corsair would be used two final times during the 80s. In 1983, it was called upon to aid in Operation Urgent Fury over Grenada. Then, in 1989, while National Guard crews were in rotation at Coronet Cove, they were asked to assist in Operation Just Cause, marking the final 34 sorties the aircraft would fly. While the US Navy's A-7E would see use in Desert Storm, the 7D would not, being slowly phased out and finally retired in May 1993.
In retrospect, the Air Force Corsair was arguably the most impressive strike platform in Vietnam, and certainly the most precise on average. It had a brief frontline life. After all, it was only ever a temporary solution to a broader US Air Force deficiency. Yet, despite this short period, it held a near-perfect combat record, even as aircraft losses were common. The groundbreaking use of new digital avionics, CCIP and CCRP modes, and the new HUD gave it a distinct advantage over its contemporaries, and the system it validated would directly influence the very system still found on 4th and 5th generation fighters. Its legacy would be carried on by its spiritual successor, the A-10 Warthog, which has earned a similar impressive record over the decades. Needless to say, the A-7D was a pioneering platform, and one whose influence is still felt today.
Thanks for watching. Our videos are researched, written and produced by a small team of filmmakers dedicated to bringing you accurate military aviation history from around the world. Please consider supporting us by joining our merch and members site for early access, bonus content and merch discounts, or become a YouTube channel member for early access, or simply hit subscribe. Your support means everything.